Hello everybody, I am Alans, pro TFT players, and I'll talk to you about the augment selection today. In TFT we can categorize 5 types of augments. Those are economy, items, combat, hero, and unique. So basically, when do you want to pick, like for example, econ augments versus power augments in the game? So it varies on the stage and on the meta. So let's take an example of the current meta. We have the fast 8 meta where all the roll down happens on level 8. In this type of meta, on the stage 2, you want to heavily focus on getting econ augment unless it's varied by some sort of portal or encounter that will inflate the economy of the game. Then you can lean towards more items, more power going into the board because that economy will be provided by other source. So you don't need it from the augment. However, if you want to roll down as like the current meta is on stage 4-2, then natural gold without any streak, you'll end up with 20 gold and not much more without any econ. So that's why you want to focus on stage 2 to get some sort of power up, either the gold power up or XP power up, that will allow you to have at least 50-60 gold on 4-2 to roll down for your 4-cost units. However, if the meta shifts towards like playing more aggressively on stage 3, where you want to play more 3-cost units, 2-cost units, then it'll be more important to pick early on combat augments, item augments than econ, because the game starts early on, like the aggression goes on early on. So going more in depth of the power augments, those go between combat and the items, and when do you want to pick them? So basically, we have items on the units that are your biggest upgrade to the unit, and you want to start focusing on the combat augments once you have those 3 items on the unit and they cannot exceed the amount of those items. That's why early on, like on stage 2, you want to avoid picking a combat augment unless it's clearly broken, and it's better to focus on the item augments because this will give you way more tempo than any combat augment would. However, the more later into the game you go, the more items you obtain from PvE runs, then the power shifts from items to combat augments once your carry or frontline units have those 3 items, and then you can exceed their power with those specific combat augments. Also worth remembering is to not stack diminishing return of the same effect. What does it mean? When we have certain portal that gives you, for example, items, let's say you get 4 extra items at the start of the game, it's worth not to take early on more items on top of that and focus instead of going for the econ or combat augment to multiply the different effects and not to stack the same one because it has diminishing return. So what are those econ combat augments? So let's have some examples. Econ augments goes between either gold or XP, something that allows you to reach higher level with higher amount of the gold and doesn't necessarily benefit your board on its own. So things that gives you gold, for example, switching gears, raining gold, or on the other hand, the things that gives you XP, like patient study, epoch, great mix between 2 because it gives you rolls and it can give you also some tempo on the board while maintaining decent HP pushing levels, great argument. Slamming gives you power on top of getting you XP. So you see there we have some mix of the tempo plus econ augments in the game that are very, very good right now. Moving on to item augments, those separate on the support items, artifact items, and the generic items. As mentioned, those are more powerful early on because your units don't have any items yet, and you start with on general 3 items. So getting like 2 extra components make your units usually even twice stronger early on, and it's a great tempo tool. However, like it's worth taking when you have already some upgrades to the board and you can start going for the tempo win streak. In terms of combat power augments, you want to lean towards picking them later on instead of early. However, they are so powerful, some of them, that it's worth taking early on, such as Baboon, such as Combat Caster, Epitaph, that goes into the specific comp and they just exceed everything else. That's why even though normally you want to pick econ early, you'll pick them instead because they are so good. A great alternative game plan could be picking a hero augment. So you don't have to go into the rolling on the stage 4 for 4 costs. Instead, you can be playing a reroll 2-cost unit, which are having a great scaling right now in the game. And yeah, it's just a great alternative win con. And right now, whenever I see one, I just almost auto pick if I have at least 2 components that can work with that argument. Examples of such arguments are just Lucky Pose, Ethereal Blades, Midnight Siphon. Obviously, scouting early on so you don't pick the same hero argument as other people in the lobby is quite important. For example, Lucky Pose gives you 2-star Kobuko. If you have, for example, like Redemption to Slam, you can generate 1 to 2 gold per fight just of the Kobuko killing of units with his ability. So it's not only great scaling argument into the late game, but it's also econ argument that gives you some tempo early on. So as you see, you have 3 arguments in one, which makes it one of the best arguments right now in the game. There is also a 5th category of unique arguments, such as Recombobulator, Fine Vintage, that you'll pick in a very specific spot, like Fine Vintage when you are flooded with the amount of the items from like certain encounters, or Recombobulator if you happen to have, for example, like a 3-cost 2-star unit early on, you see Recomb, it doesn't really fit your board, and you just want to gamble. Sometimes it's just a correct play. So here we have some examples in terms of like the argument selection in the given spot. Here we see the Story Champion, which gives you a 2-star Garen, and that unit requires specific items. You want at least to have BT and Titan for your Garen. Here the player has the bow and BF on the bench, and he needs only 2 defensive components to complement it. It's a great choice to go off, because it's again one of the best arguments, and you can play carry Garen with 6 Warden. And this is the classic spot of just having multiple items, no extra gold encounter, and picking Patient Study allows you to ramp up into Fast 8 and roll down on 8. However, Prize Fighter would be viable if we have some upgrades or good item slumps. Item slumps would be okay, but the problem is not having any upgrades, so you have to probably opt here into Patient Study instead. Overall, being able to determine what augments to pick in certain spots is a great skill to have, because it will improve your game plan for each stage, and developing your ability to think critically around your decisions will improve not just your argument selection, but every aspect of the game. That was all for the argument selection. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and remember to follow our social media accounts at TFT Esports EMEA in X, and goodbye everybody.